What if I told you that 30,000 goats almost destroyed a United States of America military base? Not enemies, not missiles, not spies, but ordinary goats. This is not a joke or a fiction. This is a true story of how a small mistake turned into a huge catastrophe. Subscribe to the channel. It will be interesting. It all started in the 1870s. American naval sailors were looking for a way to provide themselves with food during long voyages and stays off the shores of the Pacific Ocean. The solution seemed simple and convenient. Bring live livestock to a small island to have fresh meat on hand at any time. San Clemente Island is located about 80 kilometers southwest of Los Angeles. It is elongated, rocky, and windswept. The United States Navy used it as a training range. There were almost no people there, but the nature was unique, found nowhere else. Rare animals lived on the island. A special variety of jay, a small lizard that cannot be found anywhere else in the world, and turtles that had adapted to the local climate over thousands of years. The vegetation was also peculiar. Dry shrubs, low trees, and grasses that knew how to survive on rocky slopes under the scorching sun. And so, into this fragile natural system, the military released goats. At first, there were very few of them, literally a few heads. No one thought anything bad would come of it. The goats grazed, provided milk and meat, and didn't particularly bother anyone. Everything was going according to plan. But goats have one remarkable property. They multiply very quickly. With a good food base and an absence of predators, their numbers grow exponentially. On San Clemente, there were no wolves, bears, or any other animals that could restrain the growth of the herd. The goats were left to their own devices. 10 years passed, and there were noticeably more goats. 20 years passed, and there were very many of them. By the middle of the 20th century, the herd already numbered thousands of heads. And by the 1980s, about 30,000 wild goats were rampaging on the island. 30,000. On an island with an area of only about 145 square kilometers. What do 30,000 goats do when they have nothing to do but eat? They eat. They eat everything in sight without stopping, from morning until evening. Bushes, grass, young tree shoots, bark, and roots. They gnaw plants down to the very root and do not allow them to recover. Over 100 years, the goats destroyed about 80% of all the island vegetation. 8 out of every 10 bushes, trees, and grasses simply disappeared. The island began to change right before our eyes. Where there used to be thickets, bare earth now stuck out. Where streams used to flow, washouts and ravines formed. Soil without plant roots holds poorly. When it rains, it washes away and slides down the slopes. When the wind blows, it rises into the air in dusty clouds. This is exactly what began to happen on San Clemente. The island was literally melting and collapsing. The military base was in danger. Landslides threatened roads and structures. Dust storms made flights and equipment operation difficult. The shores were eroding, exposing the rocky foundation of the island. What started as a convenient source of food turned into a serious military problem. But it was not just about the military infrastructure. Scientists and conservationists raised the alarm for a different reason. That same unique jay, lizard, and the turtles that had lived on the island for thousands of years were on the brink of total extinction. Their home was destroyed. They simply had nowhere to live and nothing to eat. The San Clemente Island jay became a symbol of this catastrophe. Its numbers decreased so much that ornithologists spoke of the threat of total extinction. A bird that had survived for millennia could not survive in the conditions that goats created in some 100 years. The Navy faced a difficult choice. On the one hand, the island was needed as a range. Firing, landings, and equipment tests were conducted here. On the other hand, the United States environmental laws required the protection of rare species. The military was caught between two obligations. For 20 years, from the beginning of the 1960s to the early 80s, there were disputes, meetings, and sessions. The military delayed. Scientists demanded action. Officials wrote papers. And the goats, meanwhile, continued to eat. Every day, every hour, every minute. Finally, in 1980, a decision was made. The goats must be removed from the island, completely, all 30,000. This was a grand task that no one had ever solved on such a scale before. The operation began, and it turned out to be not simple at all. The first stage was relatively easy. Where the goats gathered in large herds, they could be trapped or shot in groups. Special teams traveled around the island, shot the animals, and took away the carcasses. The count went into the hundreds, then the thousands. In parallel, they tried to catch some of the goats alive and remove them from the island. Some were transferred to farms, others went to zoos. This was more humane, but much more difficult and expensive. A live goat needs to be caught, held, loaded, and transported. This required time and money. Helicopters became an indispensable tool for the operation. From the air, it was possible to detect animals over large areas, monitor their movement, and guide ground teams. Pilots circled over the island for hours, looking for goats in the folds of the terrain and shrubs. Everyone was involved, from simple infantrymen to snipers. The operation went on around the clock, 7 days a week in any weather. But the further the operation progressed, the more difficult it became. After the large herds were destroyed, the remaining goats scattered across the island. They climbed into the most inaccessible canyons, hid in the rocks, and went into thickets that were difficult to pass through. A single goat in the mountains is not at all the same as a herd on an open plain. It has to be found, tracked, and reached. San Clemente Island is cut by ravines and covered with rocky ledges. People moved there with difficulty, while the goats felt right at home. Years passed. Teams of hunters replaced each other. The counters showed ever larger numbers of destroyed animals. But there was no complete victory. There were still goats on the island. Exactly how many, no one knew for sure. They hid so skillfully that it was impossible to count them. By the end of the 90s, it seemed that the main part of the work was done. Most of the goats had been removed. But the last few hundred turned out to be the most cunning. They seemed to have learned to hide from people, change routes, and avoid places where they had seen hunters before. It was then that the military made an unconventional decision. They hired a professional hunter from Africa. A man who had spent his whole life in the bush, tracking animals in the most difficult conditions. He knew how prey thinks. He understood the logic of animals, their habits, and their reactions to danger. This hunter took on a task that others had already refused. The last 500 goats, the most cautious, the smartest, and the most resilient. Those who survived 20 years of hunting and learned to be invisible. The hunter approached the task professionally and methodically. In 4 months, he shot them all 500, one after another, sometimes a few a day, sometimes one. He looked for tracks, studied paths, and anticipated routes. He worked alone, without helicopters and thermal imagers, relying only on his experience. In the year 2009, the last goat on San Clemente Island was killed. Almost 140 years after the first animals were brought to the island, the operation concluded. The island was completely cleared. This took almost 30 years of active work and cost many millions of dollars. But what happened to the island after that? Nature, as it turned out, knows how to recover. Already a few years after the start of the island clearing operation, scientists noticed the first signs of revival. Where there was bare earth before, young shoots appeared. Plant seeds that had lay in the soil for decades waiting for their hour began to germinate. Grass returned first of all, then shrubs, then young trees. The process was slow but steady. The island was starting to turn green again. The San Clemente Island jay gradually restored its numbers. Birds returned to where they had not appeared for decades. Nests were built in places that had already been forgotten as bird grounds. Ornithologists watched this with joy and relief. The lizards, which were threatened with total extinction, also began to recover. Their habitat was returned to them: bushes, grass, places for shelter, and hunting for insects. The population went up, slowly but surely. And then scientists decided to go further. They wondered, what would help the island recover faster and more reliably? The answer turned out to be unexpected. Turtles are needed. Large turtles that know how to eat vegetation moderately without destroying it to the root, like goats. Giant turtles were brought to the island specifically. They began to perform a role that scientists called the work of living lawnmowers. The turtles eat grass and shrubs, but they do it differently than goats. They do not tear out the roots and do not destroy the entire plant. Turtles move slowly and eat a little at a time. They help maintain the balance of vegetation, not letting one species displace all the others. This is called ecosystem management using large animals, a smart and beautiful way to restore what was destroyed. Today, San Clemente Island looks completely different than it did in the 80s. The vegetation has been restored by about half, and this process continues. The military range still operates, but now, next to the soldier exercises, turtles wander slowly along the slopes. The story of San Clemente Island has become a textbook example for ecologists and the military around the world. It is studied as a model of what happens when a person does not think about the consequences of their actions in nature, and as a model that a catastrophe can be corrected if you set to work seriously. How much did the entire operation cost? The exact data is classified, as is much related to military facilities. But according to various estimates, only the direct costs for the shooting and removal of goats amounted to tens of millions of dollars. Plus, years of work by scientists, hunters, and helicopter pilots. For comparison, the first goats most likely cost the military a few coins or were obtained for free. A small, cheap, and seemingly reasonable decision turned into one of the most expensive ecological operations in the history of the American military department. Another amazing creature lived on the island that few people know about. This is the island fox, a small animal found only here on the California islands. It is smaller than an ordinary house cat, weighing from 1 to 2.5 kilograms. This is the smallest fox in North America. The island fox appeared on San Clemente thousands of years ago, moving from the mainland, most likely with the help of people. Over the millennia of isolation, it became a separate subspecies, slightly smaller, with a different color, and with fewer vertebrae in the tail. This fox is not afraid of people and comes very close. It would seem that with the departure of the goats, the fox should have fared better. The vegetation is recovering, and there is more food. But history took a different path. The military themselves began to trap and destroy the foxes. And here is why. A rare subspecies of bird, the loggerhead shrike, lived on the same island, which is found nowhere else on Earth, only on San Clemente. By the year 1998, only 14 birds remained in the wild. 14. The species was on the doorstep of total extinction. The foxes were raiding the nests of the shrike and eating the chicks. The military decided the bird must be saved at any cost and began to trap the foxes. Some of the animals died. The fox population on the island decreased sharply. People were once again saving some, causing damage to others. The situation reached a dead end. Destroying the fox was impossible. It was also a rare species. But leaving the shrike without protection was also not possible. Then the military came up with an unexpected solution: electric fences around the bird nesting sites. They scared away the foxes that came too close and gave the birds the opportunity to reproduce quietly. In parallel, the San Diego Zoo began to breed shrikes in captivity and release young birds on the island. The program gave results. By the year 2023, the shrike population grew to several thousand individuals. The species was officially removed from the list of endangered ones. The fox also survived and restored its numbers. Today, about 1,200 island foxes live on San Clemente. Scientists monitor them with GPS, tracking their movement and the state of the population all year round. The animals feel confident. The night lizard from San Clemente Island also went through hard times. The goats destroyed the stones and shrubs under which it hides and lays eggs. When the vegetation began to recover, the lizard returned to the places where it had not been seen for decades. In the year 2023, it was crossed off the list of protected species. Military artillery fire from ships at the southern part of the island also caused damage to nature. The shells set the shrubs on fire. Fires destroyed the very thickets that had recovered with such difficulty after the goats. The military had to change the exercise schedule to prevent fires during the bird nesting season. The professional hunter from Africa who completed the operation to destroy the last goats became a kind of legend of this story. His name in open sources is almost never mentioned. The military does not like extra publicity, but his work was key. In the year 2023, the American government held a solemn ceremony on San Clemente Island. The Navy and the Nature Conservation Service jointly celebrated the restoration of 5 animal and plant species that were removed from the endangered list. 40 years of work, and the result is obvious. Today, San Clemente Island is closed to ordinary tourists. It is still a military range where exercises of the fleet, Marines, and Special Forces go on around the clock. But in the same canyons where shells explode, rare birds nest. Next to the military roads, foxes wander. Life and war coexist on one small island. Subscribe.